You everyone for your patience in returning to your seats. Let's continue today's event with the discussion Media Literacy and Cognitive Aspects in the Age of AI. That will be one of the two discussions, and now we will try to highlight how to better research and study this question in order to understand this question better. And in the first part of the conversation, we will have Ilva Skulte, Associate Professor at the Riga Stradins University, Jānis Buholcs, Associate Professor and Lead Researcher at Vidzeme University of Applied Sciences, Gundars, Bergmanis-Korāts, that we already heard today, who is a Principal Scientist, Cybersecurity and AI Technology Researcher at the NATO Stratcom Center. And remotely, we will have Kristīne Šneidere joining, who is an Assistant Professor and Researcher at Riga Stradins University. Kristīne, I'm very glad to hear you today. See you here today as well. We will have a free discussion, so everyone can speak when they have something to say, but I would like to start with the question on cognitive dissonance. It's a situation when in our mind, when we find out new information, we contradict ourselves. So in a way it might cause pain or not, but in any way it is not pleasant. So is this something that is researched enough? And maybe you could talk about your experiences, why it happens in such a way, and why are we so stubborn and not ready to admit defeat, that something does not match what we have in our minds at that moment. Well, I will dare to start. So this aspect is definitely very important, and it has been researched quite a lot. But what I would like to add here is that we should not make it into an absolute, because this is not the case that people live in their own parallel informational spaces and that they're never ready to hear anything that they do not agree with. Of course, this does not work this way. Of course, there are specific situations where this happens more often, usually in situations where we're talking about topics that are close to a person's identity, their worldview, and these are topics in which the person has involved and invested themselves with. So these might be topics where it is very difficult to change a person's opinion. But at the same time, we as people are very emotional and irrational. But of course, we are not completely irrational. So this means that doesn't mean that we, under no circumstances, will ready to consider facts and listen to them. From my side, I would first of all like to say that it is not a new discovery. Cognitive dissonance, the concept of it and theory of it has been developed in the 50s, and it has been researched for all of these decades. But in time, of course, it gets its specific interesting context. And if we talk about communication on social media, we have this new aspect, and I would actually like to add this another aspect to the pain that we mentioned. So this first reaction that was described actually is aggression, an emotional reaction. And in this context, I believe that everyone has faced this in school. So when we learn something new, we often find ourselves within cognitive dissonance. And by gaining more and more and more information, and taking on this role, that's actually how the learning process goes. And maybe I would like to add to my colleagues, from my side, it's definitely not a new phenomenon, but what makes this phenomenon new and topical and important in this specific time is this technological aspect, because technology develops and the way we consume information changes, and the way the information arrives to us changes, and of course the way we search for information changes. So this phenomenon phenomenon, although it's not a new phenomenon, it is still topical and important. And if we talk about specific groups of society, of course, we cannot generalize and say, as my colleague already said, that we are in a way rational beings. But if we tried to discuss vaccine safety with anti-vaxxers, it would be a great challenge. So in this cognitive dissonance, there are great challenges, and not only because it is very complicated to speak of certain topics, but this cognitive aspect brings about new features. And this will be a future question on how we continue the research direction in this field. Kristīne, maybe you would like to say something. Well, in my opinion, my colleagues have clearly already talked about the research side and their own experience side on this concept. From my side, maybe I would like to add that this cognitive dissonance can change depending on age and aging time. And one of the characteristics when we age, we see is that we reinforce our convictions, and our belief in certain concepts and things is reinforced, and it's much more difficult to integrate within this new information. And of course we can get in these sometimes painful, as my colleagues mentioned, contradictions. So our convictions contradict what we see anew. So Kristīne, maybe could you reveal these age ranges? From what age to which age, and is it really impossible for senior citizens to change their convictions? Well, of course, that's not what I'm trying to say. Elderly people, for elderly people, these processes happen slightly differently, because we assume that elderly people are actually more vulnerable to fake news, but actually, research shows that this is not true. What happens to elderly people is maybe their flexibility of information consumption slows down, but what's added here is a larger amount of information which remains in our minds. It's broader knowledge. So these convictions oftentimes are rooted in what we know about the world, and receiving new information, we see a situation where it's both easier and harder to evaluate the trustworthiness of this information. So I could say that we can definitely change our convictions when we are 65, 75, 85, but they are based on completely different information than what information we have at 25, 35, or 45. And I wanted to add to what my colleague just said, that we should consider and take into account not only elderly people, we have to consider that this rapid technological development age creates anxiety not only in elderly people but in youths as well, for example, when they're trying to enter the labor market. And this technological development is so rapid that it creates the situation where we don't know what our future holds. And of course we can link this to the digital skills of elderly people, and for example in rural areas, and how well are they trained. So this is another thing that has to be taken into account. So Gundars, tell me, for example, 20 years ago, a lot of people, especially in our large neighbor, based their informational field on what they could see on the TV in those channels. And this attitude has been reinforced over decades, so it's hard for them to believe in images that come from Ukraine, and they just hear what the TV channel that you're used to is saying. So in this time where we're in such different environments, and when there's information arrives to us in different ways, do we see this change of conviction change, or is it more fragile for people that have lived in this time of linear television? Well, I must say that these new technologies allow us to access information much more quickly and on a much larger scale. And if we take a look at the diversification of information based on our values, we will see for the communication channels which meet our values or match our values. If we look at the average media consumer or information consumer, we can see that communication platforms such as Telegram, despite the fact that there's a lot of anti-Kremlin information, and the people that want to believe the Kremlin propaganda will look for such Kremlin propaganda channels. So this does not free us from this situation. I just wanted to add, if we're talking about theories, a lot of people will be familiar with echo chambers. So, in connection with this cognitive dissonance theory, in a way we are trying to avoid this dissonance. We are trying to enter this echo chamber and never leave. And in the age of TV, although I think there's still a large role that television plays in our society, we could see and look for alternatives in this vast field that is the internet. And if we talk about the role of technology, there's another aspect. There are these scenarios where people initially do not have an established opinion. They do not want to seek something very specific. So, in a modern informational environment and social media, we have to talk about this algorithmic recommendation role. So a person opens their timeline, they take a look at whatever is shown to him, something about the war, something about politics, something about something else. He spends a minute or two looking at that, scrolls down, and he might think that it does not stay in his conscience, but it might actually enter his brain. He has not looked at this very deeply, but his opinion might be informed by this, in a way, random information that he has not searched for. It might affect the way he sees the world and considers these questions. Ilva, I know that you research critical reading literacy or skills. And from research we see that reading skills are very low for young people now, and we can't even talk about critical reading. So could it mean that a large part of society is only perceiving the world through emotion, not trying to take an in-depth look in the content? Well, I would like to start by saying my interest in reading is based in my interest in books. And in this context of technologies, we can talk about reading in several ways, including ways that the existing educational curricula already consider. And I would not like to devalue the fact that we are already teaching analyzing reading materials. And here we're maybe not talking about critical reading, so if we want to switch from critical reading to smart reading. But if we take a look at the technological environment, I would like to mention the previous colleague's presentation, the word multimodal, and in a lot of ways just reading plain text, in which I have interest because of my conviction that we are reading much more now, and we actually do not perceive the fact that we have as reading. So what we should pay attention to, in my opinion, in research and in school to improve the reading skills, and actually we've gathered here today to talk about how we could improve the reaction post-reading, which is change in attitude, change in operation or action or behavior, because this is the focus on media literacy. But I think when speaking about modern technologies, we should start with the idea that a text is not only deciphering letters in an alphabetic system and deciphering words in a language's lexical system. We should pay attention to visual literacy, for example, to determine if there's a capital letter or a small cap, and how we read what we read, and, for example, how audio specificity is affected, for example, intonations, and how in short messages and posts on Twitter, X, where there's a limited amount of characters, how we operate in this very fine, sophisticated way with large letters, abbreviations, emojis, etc. So I would like to say that multimodality is key, and critical reading in a social cultural aspect is something that we have to pay attention to if we want to educate a young person that knows how to read in school.
I just wanted to add to what was just said about this multimodality. If we look at TikTok and also Instagram, I like this concept that we think about thinking as quick thinking and slow thinking. Quick thinking is that we quickly take the information and base it on our convictions, whereas slow thinking is that we analyze the information we have. And when we interact with these entertaining apps like TikTok, we train this quick thinking and quick acceptance of convictions, and this promotes this confirmation bias in many political contexts. And when there's also a political context. And is it not that we just train, we just accumulate this, we have the skill of quick thinking, but how is it, how do you, what do you think, do we actually still have time for this slow thinking? This is the matter of phenomenon of information availability. We are afraid to lose some information. This is this fear of missing out. And then this is also a question of motivation when we decide not to become a victim of this information flow. And then we can and should stop at some point. And this is a question of motivation. Kristīne, maybe you have something to add? Yes, I was sitting and thinking about this slow thinking, and it is really what is shown in studies. These people who can stop and reflect on what they have read, they tend to not believe in this fake news and not take in this false information. What I would like to underline, or maybe add, I noticed this in my case. Reading lectures as I work at the university, and one lecture is 1.5 hours. 1.5 hours is the span of attention of my span of attention. And it has changed, and this is also where this big information flow comes in, and how we have trained our brain to focus and maintain information and regulate resources for a certain time. If we are used to looking at TikTok videos, which is an average of 1 minute or maybe 3-4 minutes, of course our brain adapts to this pattern, and we can have this information span of 4 minutes. This is the average time. So thus, yes, I agree that this slow thinking, this ability to reflect, is one of the most important aspects that we have to work with when thinking about working with people. because this is where this information comes in, and we also have to think about our daily habits. Yeah, maybe take a train to have some time to think. I would like to add that this is important to look at this aspect in the context of media literacy. Because media literacy is a popular concept that we mention in a lot of aspects, but this is something to consider when we think about how media works and how we consume media. And this idea or this feeling about the attention span and not being able to have it. 10 years ago we read a book and now we can't do it anymore. Or there is a feeling that it's not possible to do it. So this is something that at least in our perception is happening, so we are doing it. It is good to realize it, but the next thing is actually what we would do, because our phones will not disappear and social media will not disappear. These environments are made with the aim of attracting our attention so that we regularly watch these videos again and again, and as users what we do, we do it. We admit that we probably can put the phone down and find some other ways of reading or receiving information. So I'm asking, what are you reading about? And everyone was like, how is it that we can't read one book from one cover to another? I was reading a book, Spare. I will not talk about my taste, but I read it from from beginning to end. So I was the only one who read it, and I was the only one who was able to say something about reading. This is also a question about age groups, because I have noticed that I don't read as much in the evenings, because I'm just not able to do it because of eyes or because of my brain activity. But of course you can read in the digital environment. And this is closely related to what we are talking about, where we read and how we read. And we need different strategies and different knowledge or different approaches to that when we do that. I just wanted to start this question about what we put in the package of media literacy. We have come to a point where we have to have not only questions about how to work with text or images or how to stop them in various contexts, but also the question about ethics, and also the question about how well we understand ourselves in this from this psychological point of view, processes and activities that happen when we are doing it. I also think when studying at school, it's also good to know the program, for example, not simplifying it, but just making it easier for us by taking small breaks, by using little technologies or restarting ourselves in the level of cognitive skills. And there are also some advice, for example, like using meditation moments and so on. We can see it in the background as something that is not important, but I think that it should be added to this package as valuable skills and practices. And another thing I wanted to say in this context, if we talk about the amount of information and about how quickly things are happening, students don't watch videos anymore in lectures. And I think it is one of the skills that should be put into this media literacy package. So this is the skill of not following the first emotions that awake. So emotions usually wipe out what we do when looking at text. We are talking a lot about AI using GPT, perplexity, and every one of my questions is being answered in a normal language. What could it do to our thinking? Maybe there are any studies or something maybe is known about this. How does it change us? For example, I have a friend, he lives in Riga for his whole life, and now he can't leave his house to get to my place without navigation. He's completely addicted to this technology. He's a normal guy. He knows that map by heart, but what is happening to him? It's a reliance technology is what's happening. It is what's happening starting from school and even with the elderly people. This phenomenon is related to how we perceive information and how we consume it. These are these co-pilots, these services, AI services like ChatGPT. They provide us information in a way that we understand it, so we can be more lazy and we don't have to look for information in various tools. So we can put together, so that we don't have to put together these information bits. This is a ready-made product that is being offered by AI, and this is where the risk comes in. We rely on this information that these models are providing, and thus we perceive this information in a way that it is given to us, but we don't see the full picture, and we don't check the sources the information is coming from, and this is one of the most important risks. I could add that what can happen out of this, the effects are various. We are more reliable on these technologies, and we don't learn things that we should learn. A simple example, a pupil at school is using these systems that calculate instead of him or does tasks instead of him. Probably he will never understand maths. So how will he be able to do something complex when he grows up? If he has avoided from the basic if he has avoided acquiring basic skills, what happens to him later in life? So this is about doing things where we might not have enough skills. For example, a person might not be an artist, might not have any studies in art, might not have all this knowledge about design. And at this moment, this is a question if he can use this artificial intelligence in a certain way. It is important that he uses it in a correct way. But he is able to do many things that he wouldn't be able to do otherwise because he doesn't have these critical skills. How to make a good and short query? I think that actually maybe the idea of artificial intelligence is from one point of view it is an assistant to people. We shouldn't think about how artificial intelligence might think. It could work in other ways that we can't even, that we are not even able to grasp yet. But the way we should think about AI, it is not only more capable, but it can process a lot of more complex activities. It's like a machine. And the other point I would like to talk about in this discussion, we talk about opportunities. We talk about people and AI as two different things, but it should be. But they could interact with each other. Actually, it's about this digital ability and able to play in a. Maybe it's more at a theoretical level, but it's a person with artificial intelligence working together.
So our time is limited, but maybe let's do a last round, starting with Kristīne. Otherwise, Agnes is actually looking at me with an evil eye. That's something we haven't discussed yet. So about research in this information field. So maybe we could talk about what has been studied and what should be studied. What do you think should be studied by you as academics to understand how we operate in this age with all of these tools? Thank you for giving me the floor. Well, preparing for today's conversation, I was looking a lot of research, and my field is aging especially. So, and a lot of what we talked about today is in addition to my knowledge. But today we can see that media literacy is in large part only studied in the context of youths. And AI, in a way, is just considered how can we apply it, how can we use it. But at the same time, there's a large gap in informational vacuum on how this interaction between different cognitive factors, psychological factors, brain operation, and specifically the context of elderly people. And unfortunately, the reality is as it is. And soon, people aged 65 and more will make up the majority of us. So currently, it is very important to study, first of all, media literacy in the context of aging. Secondly, not only psychological factors, but brain health as well. But research shows that different brain patterns are used differently because of different factors. For example, we can look at cognitive reserves. And secondly, I would like to return to the previous conversation on driving a car. In 2002, there was a wonderful article published on hippocampus and taxi drivers, and the author came to the conclusion that the hippocampus of the taxi drivers in London is larger than the hippocampus of the common folk of London. So we can't even grasp what effects will these new technologies have on healthy brain aging. So I would like to see this as a starting point or jumping off point to continue to study the way artificial intelligence interacts with media literacy and how AI interacts with brain health. Anyone else? What should be studied? I'd say that we have studied close to nothing, because I see what lacks is experimental studies in this field, and of course it is again linked to funding, which is necessary to buy the specific equipment, and actually how science operates. We should know how research works. So from project to project, you need sustainability and development, which should be reinforced in science. But here I would like to highlight what actually we see more as a necessity in a lot of research fields, which is the capacity to cooperate. And I think this has been insufficient cooperation between disciplines and institutions, including in terms of resources. That's something that we're missing. So neuroscientists and communication researchers and communication creators, definitely. Well, I could agree with Ilva. that there's more knowns than there are, more unknowns than there are knowns. And that applies to this perception topic that we started with. So there's this important topical issue of misinformation and belief in misinformation. I wouldn't say that it is as clear and obvious. Why are people believing in this information? Why is it created and why is it disseminated? And here we see that a problem in this media literacy context. We chose this easier route and just assumed that the problem is there just because people don't know how to use the computer. They don't know how much untrue information is on social media, that they lack critical thinking, whatever it may mean in each situation. Oftentimes it is explainable by completely other things which are very hard to explain. For example, their relationship to the state, and if the state is saying something what is good for your health or other things, a person might just reject it because they simply do not believe the source. And these slogans that we have to trust experts and scientists, and we hope in a way that that will convince people not to trust in misinformation, but we know that this does not work completely. We have to pay attention to how people think, how they perceive information, how they feel in society, and what are their relationships to the states, etc. And there is an array of things that should be studied. And I have the honor to be the last one in this panel. So this research on media literacy and the way we consume information, so if we compare the studies done in the early 2000s and now, they differ greatly, not only with their discoveries and conclusions. It's because of this jump in technology, and we can definitely not say that we have not studied everything just because we are at the starting point, how these models are used in different systems, in data management and communication, etc. And from a protection and communication perspective, from strategic communication perspective, already now, currently, there is a huge effect on communication that these new AI technologies have. And we should continue to study how these technologies will affect processes, how information is disseminated, how we perceive information. And since this technology has not yet matured enough, there's a large experimental element in this technology, especially if we talk about language models, large language models, generative models, AI models. So here, because of this experimental dimension, we can look at this technology as if we were creating short-term tactics, how these AI models could be applied in our specific work, how can we foster defense and protection or data analysis, etc. So that's something that we should take a look into the future, so how these short-term tactics can become a long-term strategy. And I really like the Scandinavian approach, that we're already now creating the strategy, how will we integrate these technologies in education in the future. And our generation has not only has the capacity to quickly perceive information, but also, as we had this reference to this 1.5 hour lecture, it is hard to maintain your attention. So this is one of the skills that should be maintained in this technological age, how in this constant flow of information we can perceive the main information and save it in our brain. So that will be the deciding factor here. Thank you. So I will wish everyone, especially the ones working in the education field, to integrate this AI not only in one field, which was the internet in earlier times for journalism. So this should be a skill that goes through all aspects of our work. So this artificial intelligence and our capacity with the human intellect to use it correctly is very necessary for our information resilience. Thank you to all the participants. And now we have a 10-minute break, so we will return on 15:36. Thank you.